In a city where the streets buzzed with life, but also simmered with tension, two police officers, Detective Mark Harris and Officer Ryan Cole, had earned themselves a reputation. Known for bending the rules to suit their needs, they often crossed lines that others wouldn't dare touch. Their actions weren't always illegal, but they were far from ethical. Whether it was shaking down small-time criminals or turning a blind eye to certain activities in exchange for favors, Mark and Ryan thrived on exploiting their authority. On one chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the duo patrolled a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't exactly known for trouble, just rows of modest homes and neatly trimmed lawns, but something about the calm made them restless. They preferred chaos. It gave them an excuse to act tough. So when they spotted a sleek black car gliding smoothly down the street, its polished surface gleaming under the dim glow of the streetlights, curiosity got the better of them. "Who drives a car like that around here?" Mark muttered, narrowing his eyes at the vehicle. Ryan shrugged. "Maybe someone who doesn't belong." Without hesitation, they flicked on the siren and pulled the car over. The driver stepped out slowly, his movements deliberate and composed. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of confidence that seemed out of place in this sleepy part of town. His name, he said, was Elijah Johnson. When asked why he was there, Elijah explained calmly that he was visiting the city for a business meeting. But Mark and Ryan weren't interested in explanations. Their attention quickly shifted to the inside of the car, where they spotted an envelope stuffed with cash sitting innocently on the passenger seat. "What's all this?" Mark demanded, grabbing the envelope before Elijah could protest. "It's mine," Elijah replied firmly, though his tone remained steady. "And I'd appreciate it if you returned it." But Mark and Ryan weren't listening anymore. Greed flickered in their eyes as they thumbed through the bills. To them, this was easy money, a score too good to pass up. They accused Elijah of carrying illegal funds, ignoring his protests and brushing off his attempts to reason with them. Threatening him with arrest if he resisted further, they pocketed the cash and sent him on his way, laughing amongst themselves as they climbed back into their patrol car. Elijah stood by the side of the road, watching them drive away. There was no panic in his expression, only a quiet determination. He memorized their badge numbers, noting every detail about their appearance. As the taillights of their car disappeared into the distance, Elijah whispered softly to himself, "You'll regret this." What Mark and Ryan didn't know, and what Elijah chose not to reveal, was that he wasn't just another civilian caught in their web of corruption. In fact, Elijah was about to become the most powerful figure in their lives. Little did they realize, their reckless greed had set off a chain of events that would change everything, for both them and the entire police department. The night air was cool as Elijah climbed back into his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was deeply unsettled. The two officers who had stopped him were cocky, careless, and clearly used to getting away with whatever they wanted. Their smug expressions as they drove off with his money burned in his memory. But Elijah wasn't the kind of man to let emotions cloud his judgment. Instead, he focused on one thing: justice. Elijah knew exactly how much was in that envelope, $5,000, and why it mattered so much. It wasn't just cash. It represented months of hard work, saved for a specific purpose. He planned to use it to fund a community outreach program aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and underprivileged neighborhoods. That money symbolized hope, trust, and progress, all things Elijah believed in fiercely. And now, thanks to Mark and Ryan's greed, it was gone. As he drove home, Elijah replayed the incident in his mind. He thought about how easily they had dismissed him, assuming he was someone unimportant, someone powerless. They didn't bother asking real questions or following proper procedure. No, they saw an opportunity and took it without hesitation. What infuriated Elijah most wasn't even the theft itself. It was their blatant disregard for accountability. These men wore badges, symbols meant to represent protection and integrity, yet they acted like predators preying on the vulnerable. But there was something else gnawing at the edges of Elijah's thoughts, something they didn't know, something that would turn this seemingly small act of corruption into a reckoning neither of them could have imagined. Elijah had been preparing for this role for years, working tirelessly, earning respect, proving himself capable of leading by example. Tomorrow, he would step into his new position as chief of police. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very people who had stolen from him would soon be answering to him. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he considered the situation. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message. Corruption wouldn't be tolerated under his watch, no matter who was involved. If anything, dealing with Mark and Ryan personally would make the lesson hit harder. When Elijah arrived home, he sat quietly in his living room, staring at the blank space where the envelope should have been. He pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app, jotting down details, badge numbers, descriptions, license plate numbers. Every piece of information counted. Then he drafted a mental plan. First, he'd gather evidence. Second, he'd ensure their actions were exposed publicly. Finally, he'd hold them accountable, not because of personal vendettas, but because it was the right thing to do. For a moment, Elijah allowed himself to imagine their faces when they realized who he truly was. Would they feel shame, fear, regret, or would they try to weasel their way out of trouble, as they likely always had before? Either way, Elijah knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't see it coming. By the time he turned off the lights and went to bed, Elijah felt a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the entire department. Change was coming, whether people liked it or not. And Mark and Ryan, they were about to learn the hard way that stealing from the wrong person carried consequences far greater than they could ever anticipate. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the police headquarters, casting long shadows across the bustling room. Officers moved about, some sipping coffee, others chatting casually, unaware that today would mark a turning point for all of them. Elijah Johnson walked in with an air of quiet confidence, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Dressed in a sharp suit and tie, he carried himself like a man who knew his worth, a stark contrast to the usual laid-back demeanor of many in the department. As he made his way to the front of the room, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Word had spread quickly about the new chief of police, though few details were known beyond his name and the fact that he was young, black, and highly qualified. For some, this appointment came as a shock. For others, it felt long overdue. Either way, everyone wanted to see what kind of leader Elijah would be. Standing behind the podium, Elijah scanned the room, taking in the sea of faces before him. Some officers met his gaze with curiosity, while others avoided eye contact altogether. He could sense the mix of emotions: hope, skepticism, even hostility. But none of it fazed him. Clearing his throat, he began to speak, his voice steady and commanding. "Good morning," he started, pausing briefly to let the murmurs die down. "I want to thank each of you for being here today. I know there are questions about who I am and what I plan to do. Let me start by saying this. My goal is not to tear anything down. My goal is to build something better." He went on to outline his vision for the department, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and community trust. He spoke passionately about the need to root out corruption and ensure that every officer upheld the values their badges represented. His words resonated with some, particularly younger recruits eager for change. But for others, like Mark Harris and Ryan Cole, the speech felt more like a warning than a promise. Mark and Ryan stood near the back of the room, shifting uncomfortably as Elijah's eyes swept over the crowd. They exchanged uneasy glances, both silently wondering if their actions from the previous night might somehow come back to haunt them. Surely, they'd reasoned, no one could connect them to that traffic stop. After all, how could the new chief possibly know? Still, doubt gnawed at the edges of their minds. When Elijah mentioned plans to launch an internal investigation into past misconduct, the tension in the room became palpable. He didn't mince words, making it clear that no one would be above scrutiny, not even senior staff. "We cannot move forward unless we address the mistakes of the past," he said firmly. "And moving forward is exactly what we're going to do." As the meeting drew to a close, Elijah dismissed the group, instructing them to prepare for upcoming training sessions focused on ethics and cultural sensitivity. Mark and Ryan lingered near the door, watching as Elijah shook hands with other officers and exchanged polite conversation. Despite their efforts to appear nonchalant, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that maybe, just maybe, their secret wasn't as safe as they thought. Later that afternoon, Elijah settled into his office, surrounded by stacks of files and reports waiting to be reviewed. Among them was the incident report from the traffic stop the previous night. As he read through the details, a small, satisfied smile crossed his face. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Little did Mark and Ryan know, their reckless greed had set them directly in the path of the very man they'd underestimated. And now, justice was closer than they realized. Elijah wasted no time putting his plans into motion. The moment he stepped into his role as chief of police, he made it clear that change wasn't just a promise, it was a priority. His first order of business was to tackle the deep-rooted issues within the department, starting with an internal investigation into misconduct. He didn't announce it loudly or make a spectacle of it. Instead, he worked quietly but efficiently, ensuring every action was deliberate and calculated. Sitting at his desk, Elijah sifted through stacks of reports, his sharp eyes scanning for anything unusual. When he came across the incident report from the previous night, the one involving a traffic stop where 2 officers had confiscated cash from a civilian, his lips curled into a faint smile. It was almost poetic, he thought. The universe had handed him the perfect opportunity to set an example without him even having to look for it. He called in Detective Laura Simmons, one of the most trusted members of the team. Laura was known for her integrity and attention to detail, qualities that made her ideal for this task. Closing the door behind her, Elijah slid the report across the desk. "I need you to dig deeper into this," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Something about this case doesn't sit right with me." Laura raised an eyebrow as she glanced over the details. "You think there's more to it?" she asked cautiously. "I know there is," Elijah replied, leaning back in his chair. "These officers claim they seized illegal funds, but there's no evidence to support that claim. I want you to review the dashcam footage, interview witnesses if necessary, and find out exactly what happened. And keep this between us for now." Laura nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation. She left the office with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Elijah turned his attention to other pressing matters, knowing full well that patience would be key. This wasn't just about catching Mark and Ryan. It was about dismantling the culture of impunity that allowed such behavior to thrive in the first place. Over the next few days, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Laura reviewed the grainy dashcam footage from the patrol car, which showed Mark and Ryan pulling over the driver, a man who bore a striking resemblance to Elijah himself. The audio captured fragments of their conversation, including Elijah's protests and their dismissive responses. There was no mention of proper protocol or documentation, only vague accusations followed by threats. It was sloppy, arrogant, and completely unacceptable. Laura also tracked down surveillance footage from nearby businesses, which provided additional context. One camera caught Elijah standing by his car after the stop, visibly frustrated but composed. Another showed Mark and Ryan laughing as they drove away, clearly pleased with themselves. The evidence was damning, and Laura knew it. When she reported back to Elijah, laying out everything she had found, he listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Good work," he said finally, nodding in approval. Now, let's see how far this goes. As the investigation progressed, whispers began spreading through the department. Officers noticed an uptick in audits and reviews, though no one could pinpoint why. Mark and Ryan, however, grew increasingly uneasy. They hadn't heard anything official about the traffic stop, but something about the atmosphere felt different. Conversations seemed heavier, glances lingered longer, and the usual camaraderie among colleagues started to fade. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee in the break room, Mark leaned close to Ryan and muttered, "Do you think anyone knows?" Ryan shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant. "Nah, we're fine. Nobody's gonna care about some random guy on the side of the road." But deep down, both men knew better. Their instincts told them trouble was brewing, even if they couldn't see it yet. What they didn't realize was that the storm was already upon them. And its name was Elijah Johnson. For Elijah, this was more than personal vindication. It was a chance to prove that accountability wasn't optional, regardless of rank or reputation. Every step forward brought him closer to exposing the truth and teaching Mark and Ryan a lesson they would never forget. The summons came on a Thursday morning, slipped discreetly into Mark and Ryan's lockers along with a note instructing them to report to the chief's office immediately. At first, they assumed it was routine, perhaps a discussion about patrol schedules or some minor administrative issue. Neither of them suspected anything serious. After all, their traffic stop from the other night had barely registered as noteworthy in their minds. They were seasoned officers who knew how to cover their tracks, or so they thought. When they arrived at Elijah's office, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, Elijah sat behind his desk, calm and composed, his sharp eyes fixed on a stack of papers. He gestured for them to sit without looking up, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uneasy. Mark shifted in his chair, while Ryan cleared his throat nervously. Finally, Elijah set the papers down and leaned forward, folding his hands together. "I wanted to discuss something with you both," he began, his tone measured but firm. "It's regarding an incident that occurred earlier this week, a traffic stop involving a black man driving a high-end vehicle." Mark and Ryan exchanged quick glances, their unease growing. Yeah," Mark stammered, trying to sound casual. "We handled it by the book, sir. Nothing unusual there." Elijah raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "By the book," he repeated slowly. Interesting choice of words. He reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a printed copy of the dashcam footage transcript. Sliding it across the desk, he added, "Take a look at this and tell me if it aligns with your version of events." Ryan hesitated before picking it up, scanning the text quickly. His face paled as he read through the details, the accusations, the threats, the blatant disregard for protocol. Beside him, Mark leaned over to get a better look, his jaw tightening with each line. This isn't accurate," Ryan blurted out, though his voice lacked conviction. "There must be some mistake." "No mistakes here," Elijah said evenly. "In fact, I've reviewed not only the dashcam footage, but also surveillance videos from nearby businesses. They paint a very clear picture, one that doesn't reflect well on either of you." For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of Elijah's words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on them like a storm cloud. Then, as realization dawned, Mark's eyes widened. "Wait a second," he said, his voice trembling. "Are you saying you were the guy we pulled over?" Elijah leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "That's correct. And let me assure you, gentlemen, I remember every detail of our encounter, including the part where you stole money from me." The room fell silent. Mark and Ryan stared at him, their faces pale and their mouths agape. All the bravado they'd shown during the traffic stop evaporated in an instant, replaced by sheer panic. For the first time, they truly understood the gravity of their actions and the consequences awaiting them. "Chief Johnson, please," Ryan pleaded, breaking the silence. "We didn't know it was you. If we had known—" "What?" Elijah interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You wouldn't have done it. That's not how accountability works. It shouldn't matter who the person is. It matters what kind of officer you choose to be." He stood up then, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of them. His presence was commanding, leaving no room for excuses or deflection. "Your actions speak louder than your words," he continued. "And right now, your actions say that you're not fit to wear those badges. Not until you prove otherwise." Mark and Ryan sat frozen, unable to respond. The reality of their situation crashed over them like a tidal wave. They weren't just facing disciplinary action. They were staring into the abyss of their own failures. And standing above them was the one man they never expected to cross paths with again. Their new boss, Elijah Johnson. Elijah's words echoed in the small office, each syllable landing like a hammer blow. Mark and Ryan sat frozen, their minds racing as they tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a reckoning. The man they had dismissed as powerless days earlier now held their futures in his hands, and Elijah wasn't about to let them off easily. "Let me make one thing clear," Elijah said, his voice steady but laced with authority. "I'm not here to punish you out of spite or revenge. I'm here because this department, and the people it serves, deserve better. What you did wasn't just unethical. It was a betrayal of everything a badge stands for." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You stole from a civilian, a man who trusted you to uphold the law. You abused your power, and you thought you could get away with it. But actions have consequences, gentlemen. Starting today, you'll both be stripped of your field duties and reassigned to desk work pending a formal investigation. Your badges will be confiscated until further notice." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Elijah silenced him with a sharp look. "Don't bother trying to explain yourselves. The evidence speaks for itself. Dashcam footage, surveillance videos, witness statements. They all tell the same story. A story where two officers decided they were above the rules." Ryan slumped in his chair, his face pale and his hands trembling. He knew there was no way out of this. No amount of excuses or half-truths could undo what they had done. For the first time in his career, he felt truly powerless. Beside him, Mark clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Part of him wanted to lash out, to argue that Elijah was making too big a deal out of one incident. But deep down, he knew the truth. They had crossed a line, and now they had to face the fallout. Elijah returned to his desk and pulled out a document. "This is a public statement I'll be releasing later today," he explained, sliding it toward them. "It outlines the misconduct allegations against you and announces the steps being taken to address them. Transparency is key if we want to rebuild trust, not just with the community, but within this department as well." Mark glanced at the paper, his stomach sinking as he read the details. Their names would be attached to this scandal, broadcasted for everyone to see. Colleagues, friends, family, all of them would know what had happened. The weight of shame pressed down on him, suffocating and unrelenting. As if sensing their turmoil, Elijah softened slightly, but only slightly. "I'm giving you a chance to reflect on your actions," he said, "not just for my sake, but for yours. Think about why you became officers in the first place. Was it to serve and protect? Or was it for the power? Because if it's the latter, then maybe this job isn't for you." The room fell silent again, the air thick with tension. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens next?" "That depends on you," Elijah replied. "If you're willing to take responsibility for your mistakes and commit to change, then we can discuss reinstatement after the investigation concludes. But if you continue down this path, if you refuse to learn from this moment, then your careers as officers are over. Simple as that." With those final words, Elijah dismissed them, leaving Mark and Ryan to leave his office in stunned silence. As they walked back to their desks, heads bowed and shoulders slumped, they couldn't help but feel the eyes of their colleagues burning into them. Whispers followed in their wake, some sympathetic, others mocking. Either way, they knew their lives and their reputations would never be the same. Later that day, Elijah released the public statement, ensuring the entire city understood the seriousness of the situation. He also announced sweeping reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Training programs focused on ethics and cultural sensitivity were introduced, along with stricter oversight measures. It was a bold move, one that drew praise from community leaders and criticism from those resistant to change. For Mark and Ryan, however, the battle was far from over. Stripped of their authority and facing public scrutiny, they were forced to confront not only their actions, but also the flawed mindset that had led them there. Redemption wouldn't come easily, but Elijah had made it clear that it was possible, provided they were willing to earn it. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Ryan's lives became a shadow of what they once were. Stripped of their badges and reassigned to mundane desk work, they felt like ghosts haunting the department they had once dominated. Every task, filing paperwork, answering phones, organizing files, was a reminder of how far they had fallen. The camaraderie they once shared with fellow officers faded into awkward silences or outright avoidance. Even their own reflections in the mirror seemed foreign, etched with guilt and regret. At home, things weren't much better. News of their misconduct spread quickly, thanks to Elijah's public statement. Friends stopped calling, neighbors whispered behind closed doors, and family members looked at them with disappointment. For Ryan, the hardest moment came when his teenage son asked him point-blank, "Dad, did you really steal money from someone?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Ryan could only nod, tears welling up in his eyes as he watched his son walk away without another word. Mark fared no better. His wife, who had always supported his career, began questioning whether she even recognized the man she married. "How could you do something like that?" she demanded one evening, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "You're supposed to protect people, not take advantage of them." Mark had no defense, no justification that could erase the damage he'd caused. All he could offer was silence and the weight of his shame. But amidst the chaos and humiliation, a flicker of hope emerged. Both men knew they couldn't undo the past, but they also realized they had a choice: wallow in self-pity or try to make amends. It wasn't an easy decision. The road to redemption would be long, painful, and uncertain. But after days of sleepless nights and endless soul-searching, they reached out to Elijah, not to beg for forgiveness, but to ask for guidance. To their surprise, Elijah agreed to meet with them privately. Sitting across from him in a quiet conference room, they braced themselves for another lecture. Instead, Elijah surprised them by speaking softly, almost kindly. "I'm not here to judge you," he said. "What you've done is between you and your conscience. What matters now is what you choose to do next." He challenged them to confront their biases and understand why they had acted the way they did. "Change starts with honesty," he told them. "Be honest with yourselves about why you thought it was okay to treat someone the way you treated me. Was it because of my race, my appearance, or was it simply because you believed you could get away with it?" The questions hit hard, forcing both men to grapple with uncomfortable truths. Over time, they began attending counseling sessions and diversity training programs, not just to fulfill requirements, but to truly educate themselves. They started volunteering in community outreach programs, working alongside the very people they had once dismissed or mistreated. At first, it was awkward. They felt out of place, unsure of how to connect. But slowly, they began earning small measures of respect. One day, while helping organize a youth mentorship event, Mark found himself talking to a group of teenagers about accountability and making better choices. As he spoke, he noticed some of them nodding, listening intently. It was a humbling yet empowering moment, a reminder that even broken people can inspire change. Ryan, too, discovered a new sense of purpose. He began mentoring at-risk kids, sharing stories of his mistakes and encouraging them to learn from his failures. "I messed up big time," he admitted during one session, "but I'm trying to fix it. And if I can turn things around, so can you. Though Elijah kept a close eye on their progress, he never offered false praise or empty promises. Redemption, he reminded them, wasn't something handed out, it had to be earned. And while neither Mark nor Ryan expected to regain their former positions, they understood that rebuilding trust took time. By the end of the year, both men had left law enforcement altogether, choosing instead to dedicate their lives to serving the community in meaningful ways. Their journey wasn't perfect, and scars remained, but they were determined to leave a positive mark, proof that even those who stray can find their way back. Years passed, and Elijah Johnson's leadership left an indelible mark on the police department and the city itself. Under his guidance, sweeping reforms transformed the culture of law enforcement. Training programs focused on ethics, empathy, and cultural sensitivity became mandatory for all officers. Transparency measures ensured that misconduct was addressed swiftly and publicly, fostering trust between the community and those sworn to protect it. The department wasn't perfect, no institution ever was, but it had taken significant strides toward becoming a force for good rather than fear. For Mark Harris and Ryan Cole, life took unexpected turns. After leaving the department, they dedicated themselves to mentoring at-risk youth and volunteering in underserved neighborhoods. It wasn't easy. Their past actions still lingered over them like a shadow. Some people welcomed their efforts with cautious optimism, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether they were truly sincere or simply trying to salvage their reputations. But Mark and Ryan didn't let the doubt deter them. They showed up every day, not seeking redemption from others, but striving to earn it for themselves. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the city skyline, Elijah stood on the steps of police headquarters, addressing a crowd gathered for a community event. The occasion marked 5 years since he had taken office, and the celebration was a testament to how far the city had come. Families mingled, children laughed, and music filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that once defined these streets. As Elijah wrapped up his speech, he noticed 2 familiar faces standing near the back of the crowd, Mark and Ryan. They weren't there to draw attention to themselves. Instead, they quietly helped hand out flyers and organize activities for the kids. Elijah smiled faintly, acknowledging their presence without saying a word. Their transformation hadn't been immediate or effortless, but it was real, and that mattered more than anything. Later that night, after the festivities wound down, Elijah approached them. "You've come a long way," he said simply, his tone warm yet firm. Mark nodded, his voice tinged with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without your example, Chief. You didn't just hold us accountable, you gave us a chance to change. And we're still working on it," Ryan added quickly. "Every day is a reminder of what we lost and what we're trying to build back." Elijah studied them for a moment, seeing not the reckless officers who had once stolen from him, but men determined to make amends. "Change isn't about perfection," he replied. "It's about progress. Keep going, and don't stop." The encounter ended with a simple handshake, but its significance resonated deeply. For Elijah, it was proof that accountability could lead to growth, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. For Mark and Ryan, it was validation that their efforts, though imperfect, were making a difference. In the years that followed, Elijah's legacy continued to inspire. His tenure as chief of police became a case study in leadership and reform, taught in academies and discussed in forums worldwide. Meanwhile, Mark and Ryan found purpose beyond their old lives. Though they would always carry the weight of their mistakes, they also carried hope for themselves and for the next generation. The story of Elijah, Mark, and Ryan served as a powerful reminder that even in moments of failure, there is potential for renewal. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about creating opportunities for people to rise above their flaws and contribute to something greater. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that leave the most lasting impact.